Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver.
Nate, we are both in Vegas, so we're going to start the show off with a little update of how our first week of the World Series has been going, whether we are still as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as we were this time last week. And then we'll talk a little bit of politics, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about ranked choice voting, its implications for the Democratic mayoral primary, which is coming up in New York, as well as a little bit more abstractifying that in terms of, is this a good system? What does it reward or punish? And then we'll talk about AI a little bit. I know a frequent topic on this show. I was recently at the Manifest conference in Berkeley, California, before I came out here to Vegas. A little bit of an update on the AI 2027 report, which we talked about on a previous episode, and just kind of how we're feeling about P-Doom and kind of how the Silicon Valley community is adjusting to the constant developments in the sector.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you learned at that conference. But let's start a little closer to home and talk about P-Doom of our bankrolls. WSOP, how has week one treated you, Nate?
So I have fired 15 bullets. I know it's a violent metaphor. We're not super PC here, but a bullet in a poker term is like an entry into a tournament, right? So I probably entered 10 tournaments, but because you can enter some multiple times, I've had 15 entries into those 10 tournaments. Of those 15 entries, I've had 3 cashes or 20%, which is pretty typical, right? Mm-hmm. You cash, depending on the tournament, 12 to 15% of the time. So I guess a little bit above average, right? However, here's why it's hard to make money in the short run, the medium run in poker tournaments, right?
In the short run, the medium run, and the long run. Yes,
and the long run, period. Number one, even if you outlast 95% of people, right, you often only make roughly like 2 times, or maybe more than that, right? So if you invest $1,500 in a tournament and you make it to like the 94th percentile, right, the prize might be $4,500. So net of the $1,500 you paid to enter, right, if you entered twice, and basically it's a very top-heavy structure where you have to get in like the top 2%, or you have to run good and cash in the more expensive events, right? So the cashes I have are in an $800 event, $1,500 event, a $1,100 event, right? I also entered a $10,000 event that like quick exit, right? $3,000 event, quick exit, right? You have those. Basically, either have to run really, really deep or have your cashes be in your higher buy-in events. I've done neither. Therefore, I can say, I have cash plenty. I've been in the running, been in the mix, but like still down money. And that's often very typical. How about you? How about you, Maria?
So I have not played nearly as many live events as you. I only have 1 live cash. So that was the first event that I played, the 800. And then I played the $3,000 freeze out and did not cash that. And the monster stack, as you know, Nate, that did not go well for me. That was one of the ones that you cashed. And then yesterday I played the $3,000. Basically, it was a turbo, and you played that as well, and neither one of us cashed. Luckily, I only had to fire 1 bullet. I was unable to rebuy, so that's good. That saved me 3,000. However, what has kind of saved my last week is online. So I fired a few of the online events, came in 57th out of like 1,200 or so in one of them for about $3,000, and then last night came in 7th in a $315 event, or $320, and that was very bittersweet because 7th was about $7,000, which is a great ROI. I was only in for 1 bullet, right? You pay $320 and you get 7,000, which is amazing. First, as you know, would have been a lot more, and it was a very, I was very proud of myself for getting that far because I had an incredibly short stack basically the entire time. I just kind of never had chips to work with, and I ended up making it quite far. But that kind of saved my week a little bit because live has not been going well. Well, it's been going, it's a tiny sample size, right? This is kind of what you have to understand, that you need to kind of think of things in a bigger picture as opposed to just saying, I've only played 4 live events, right? so the fact that
okay.
I
don't like the
one.
online. I've kind of sworn off online poker. for,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
yeah,
there are definitely issues with online, but it's helped me stay more even than negative for the first
the
week.
the default experience at the World Series poker is you're always like one or two contingencies away from having like a really great World Series and one or two contingencies away from having a really bad World Series, right? You know, I made it to the very end of day 2 of the Monster Stack. You are in the money, right? And then I made a huge semi bluff. If you don't follow at home, a semi bluff is when you are hoping to get the opponent to fold, but if not, then you have a good draw that will win sometimes. So I had basically a straight flush draw, and it was a turn, so you now have only one card to make your hand, and the opponent I thought was pretty strong, but I thought the odds compelled this play, and whatever. I'm there to
You
run
went
deep.
for
I'm
it.
already in the
Yeah,
money.
you went for
I
it.
went for it. He had a set of queens. I didn't make my draw.
That was not going to fold. Yes, it's funny, Nate. You say it felt like the opponent was strong, and I think we've all had that feeling, where like just based on the way someone's playing, based on kind of the dynamics of the hand, the person is strong, but they're strong and they're strong, right? A set of queens is a hand that's probably not going to fold. If you had like naked top pair, something like that might fold, and it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to know the difference. But you had a straight flush draw. I think that you have to go for it in that situation. That's a huge combo. That's a huge combo draw. I remember when I just started playing. I think this was my only time that I went to Foxwoods. So I was trying to like really get a sense. This was for The Biggest Bluff when I was doing book research. So I was trying to get a sense of like all the different circuits and casinos and all these different flavors of poker. And I hated Foxwoods. There goes our
It's
Foxwoods.
a weird place. No,
There goes our Foxwoods
sponsorship.
sponsorship. Sorry. I hated it. Like the vibes, everything, it was just very depressing. Everything was off there. But I remember texting with Eric Seidel, who was really coaching me at the time, like kind of helping me. And this was very early. I just started playing about a hand where I don't remember the actual cards that I had, but it was I flopped a straight flush draw, right? And I ended up folding the flop because, someone bet and someone else raised. And at the end I had like 8 high or something, but the flop was, 5-6 of clubs, and I had the 7-8 of clubs, something like that. And I was like, I'm supposed to fold there, right? And he's like, no, are you insane?
Yeah.
Like you're never folding there. Like you're supposed to. He's like, you're going like even if someone shoves, like you're going with it. You're on the flop, like you have all of these odds, and like that's an insane fold. Like never make a fold like that again. But I was like, oh, like, I guess I have to fold.
No, it can be. I mean, there are times when people can bet a straight flush draw. Usually you almost have like half the pot anyway, right? There are times people can like bluff you off a good draw, right?
Absolutely. And Nate, you and I are playing for the win, not for the min cash, right? We're playing to get chips and to win this thing. So for this second week for us of the World Series, it's not actually the second week of the World Series, but may all our monster draws hit, and may we run
Some
beautifully.
draws to hit. Yeah.
Let's do it, and let's have a better update for our listeners next week. So Nate, let's turn to a totally different topic. Let's go politics and talk a little bit about ranked choice voting. Nate, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the second election in New York City where the voting has been changed so that now we are in a situation where we have ranked choice voting instead of the usual first past the post system. So let's talk just a little bit about what the differences are. And I'm right. I am correct, right? This is the second election where this is in play.
Correct. Yeah. Only for the primary.
Yes.
Actually, it's not used in the general election, which could also be chaotic. We'll probably get to that later on.
Yep. All right. So normal, first past the post, person who gets the most votes wins, right? And there can be runoffs if no one gets the requisite majority. In ranked choice voting, it doesn't quite work the same way. You get to rank your candidates in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many ranked choices you have in a given election. There's every election is a little bit different. So let's pretend that we're voting for our favorite podcasters, and just a random example. And let's imagine that, a bunch of people get lots of votes. And when you tally everyone up, I, Maria, come in last. So I'm going to be cut because the last person who comes in with, the fewest votes is going to be cut. But what's going to happen to my ballots? Well, I'm going to be cut, but the people who ranked me, who ranked me first, whoever they ranked after me is going to get all of those votes. So imagine that everyone who voted for me actually put Nate after me, right? And when you cut me, between the people who voted for Nate first and the people who voted for Nate after me, all of a sudden, Nate has lots and lots of votes, and Nate actually ends up making it, onto the ballot with lots of votes. That's how ranked choice voting works, right? Your votes get redistributed. Nate, congratulations. I've given you all of my votes. and you're gonna be zooming up those podcasting awards.
I got eliminated though. My votes got redistributed to Ezra Klein, apparently.
Damn it. We tried, Nate. But that's actually, so, we joke, but, there is a lot of strategy. There are pros, there are cons, and there's also strategy that comes up with ranked choice voting where people, and this has actually played out in elections in the past, where people do have coalitions and try to say, okay, let's try to band together so that if one of us is eliminated, our votes get passed to the other person. So that's kind of ranked choice in a nutshell. Nate, the last time this was used in New York City, it was a little bit of a disaster.
Well, it depends on who you would ask, right? So in New York last time,
it ended up working out, but
well, it depends on if you like Eric Adams. You had Eric Adams, who's a former cop in the conservative lane of the Democratic primary, not conservative relative to the U.S. overall, but there are actually a fair number of conservatives who are Democrats in New York because there's no point in being a Republican. So therefore, 15% of New York City Democrats voted for Trump, which is much higher than nationwide. You had Maya Wiley, who's the progressive candidate, and you had Catherine Garcia, who was at the time, I believe, the sanitation commissioner, who was like the competent technocrat, right? So what ranked choice voting is sort of theoretically supposed to do is produce a consensus choice, right? Where, the left likes Wiley, the right likes Adams, and the center, again, relative to the New York electorate, likes Garcia. However, in principle, you could have what's called the Condorcet winner. It's a French political scientist, I believe, somebody, Condorcet, where let's say Garcia, because she's in the middle, that all her voters, so if she were head to head against Wiley, she wins because both the moderates and the conservatives prefer her. If she's head to head against Eric Adams, she wins because all the moderates and the progressives prefer her, right? However, if the previous round is if she's stuck in the middle in third place, if it's, 40% Adams, 40% Wiley, again, conservative progressive, 20% Garcia, then she's eliminated before she has a chance to beat the other candidates one-on-one. What actually happened is she just barely beat Wiley in the penultimate round and then just barely lost to Adams in the final round, right? And so what you almost had happen is that the candidate who would have been the winner head-to-head almost got eliminated because she didn't have enough first-choice votes after other votes were redistributed. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but number one, I want to emphasize that one thing that helped her was that she agreed with Andrew Yang, who at one point had been the front runner and then faded out. We're going to mutually endorse one another, right? It's a big burden on voters to have to list 5 candidates, right?
No, so that's actually one of the issues. The other kind of issues with the New York election last time was incorrect votes were counted. So there were I think around 100,000 ballots that should not have been counted, and so they had to retally everything. But then what you were just saying, Nate. People get, it's a lot when you have to rank 5 candidates. So we've talked a lot on the show about cognitive load, right? How many things you can keep in mind. We're busy people. People's attention is an incredibly finite resource. Just how much of your time are you investing in following politics and following all the candidates, and trying to get into the weeds, and kind of figure out, okay, who stands where, who do I believe in? It's much easier to say, oh, okay, like I like this guy or this woman, right? Than to say, okay, this in order, these are my 5 preferences. And people can get confused as well, right? If they don't quite understand how ranked choice voting works, they might think that it's like, oh, I'm giving points, right? Because sometimes you have these voting systems where you allocate different points to different people, and that's just basically how it works, right? Like, oh, I gave most of my points to Nate, I gave second most points to Maria, and everyone's going to get those points tallied up. That's not how ranked choice voting works. But people sometimes especially if you've never done it before, it can be confusing. It seems straightforward, rank 5, but it's not, because ranked voting systems do differ, and we're not used to it, right? We're not used to the system where, like, I don't know any other voting in your life where you vote and like your votes get redistributed to your second choice, right? Like that's not something that's not a situation you commonly encounter. And so unless like you know and you can think through the strategy of, okay, what does that mean for how do I rank candidates, then you can get an outcome that you didn't actually mean to happen.
Yeah, no. I mean, there are systems, there are alternatives. Like one is called approval voting, where you just you vote for as many candidates as you want, right? As many candidates as you like, you think would be a good mayor, good president, whatever. Just check the box. Like that's a little bit more straightforward and not subject to manipulation. Yeah, I'm not sure. Also like, guess which people take the time to carefully think through their 5 preferences in New York. You get 5 listings, right? It's the college-educated professional class who read the New York Times in New York, right? And like research all the candidates and do their duty. And like, so it kind of like quasi disenfranchises voters that might be struggling a bit more or might not be kind of as news consuming. I'm not sure I like that quite so much, right? Mm-hmm. Here, I mean, so to discuss the problem, we have a good freelance article at Silver Bulletin about this last week, right? But like, so one problem is you have like, Zoran Mamdani is a former or current member of the Democratic Socialists of America, right? So quite left wing, but has run like a attractive campaign. I mean, he has good commercials. He's a good looking guy, right? He has some energy. He's young and a political environment where there are too many fucking old people, right? Is quite far left. Yeah. Is quite far left, but has proposals like free bus service, like city-run grocery stores in food deserts, right? A $30 an hour minimum wage or 35 or really high or something like that, right? But like, it's actually stuff that like kind of like poll tests pretty well, like a rent freeze. Like economists hate this idea. But he has made it a very competitive race against Cuomo, but there are plenty of voters who think, I don't like either one, right? Cuomo hasn't lived in New York in 30 years. He's a Me Too stuff. He's a carpetbagger. He's domineering. We don't want our own Trump.
He eats bagels the wrong way.
Is too far to the left. People have issues with him on Israel if they're pro-Israel. They have issues with him on budgeting and taxes and a lack of experience, right? And you have like all these like technocrats like running in the center lane, Brad Lander, Adrian Adams, Scott Stringer, Zelnor Myrie, right? You have a hedge funder named Whitney Tilson, I think. Yep. And so you have like all these technocrats running, and what's going to happen is that like, one of the technocrats will probably finish in 3rd place and be eliminated, even though in principle you could have like an Adrian Adams or a Brad Lander who would win head to head against these 2 polarizing candidates, right? Now the New York Times did something interesting, right? Which is they had said, yeah.
Go ahead.
The Times declared a year or so ago that we're no longer going to endorse in local races, right?
Which is bizarre, right? I think that's actually
I don't think newspapers should make endorsements.
Okay.
I think that's not
Fine. So if you don't think they should make endorsements, period, that makes sense. But if they're making endorsements in national elections, not
if they do, they should do it in local ways. I mean, infamously, the New York Times endorsed both Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren in the 2020 Democratic primary, right? Which did neither any favors, I don't think, right? They do not use ranked choice voting in most states in the primary. This time they're like, don't vote for Zoran and rank Cuomo somewhere, but then like rank like Lander or Tilson first, and like I put the editorial through like different large language models, AI models, right? Some are like, yeah, it's telling you to vote for Brad Lander, and then put Cuomo fifth. So if it comes down to Cuomo versus Sorhen, that he will prevail, right? But others were confused, right? These events say, I don't know, much like they kind of say all these mean things about Cuomo, and they say to vote for him anyway, right? So very, very weird and half-assed. And then Lander has endorsed Mamdani, and so it just kind of like it adds an element of randomness. Now, to be fair, Cuomo is almost certain to win the first choice vote, right? So in a normal mayoral election, because there is kind of an anti-Cuomo, anybody but Cuomo coalition, which is pretty broad, right? And they have different flavors of it, right? In a normal election, Cuomo just wins, goes on the general election, and so forth, right? Here, Mamdani has a decent chance. He's about 25% at Polymarket. By the way, I was a buy on Mamdani early. I thought on Zoran, like, here's a guy running a pretty energetic campaign at a moment when, like, I don't think New York is like suddenly having some like progressive spawn, but I think like people are sick of the establishment, and no one's a bigger figure of the establishment than Cuomo, right? And he's running a campaign that feels a little bit different. And I think in city elections, it doesn't have to be so ideological anyway. Like, I'm to his right? I wouldn't be terrified by his mayorship by any means at all, right? But he's overperformed. Cuomo's underperformed. As a result, he has a real shot. The general election is a mess, however, because like all these candidates basically have vehicles that can run with various minor parties in the general election, right? So you'll have already the current incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, is running as an independent. You'll have a Republican candidate, I think Curtis Silva, who's like the former guardian angel guy, right? And you could have both, like Mamdani, if he loses, could run on the working families ticket. Cuomo, if he loses, I think there's some special vehicle third party that Cuomo could run. So rarely, usually just a matter of the Democratic primary mattering. We're going to have a competitive general election in New York too, it looks like. And then it's very weird. Then you get into things where like, then it's no longer ranked choice voting. And you have Cuomo and Adams have these kind of overlap, right? And so you could see like Mamdani win with a plurality, even though he probably would lose with ranked choice voting. When you bring the more conservative voters in play, then there's probably an anybody but Zorhan coalition. So it's all kind of a mess. We like messes in New York, Maria, but this is a particular mess.
It is a particular mess. And, something that I've seen that's kind of interesting because normally, you have people like endorse candidates and say, this is why you vote for this one. In New York, because of what happened last time and because people don't quite get ranked choice all the time, I've been seeing a lot of people, instead of saying, vote for Zoran or whatever it is, they say, don't rank Cuomo, right? Like that's the messaging has shifted to like, just do not put him as any of your top 5 choices, even if you like would marginally like prefer him to someone else. And so that's like game theorifying. How do you do that? Game theorifying it to the next level right now, telling people like, don't only rank this person, do not rank this person anywhere because we don't want votes to trickle down there. And so it's kind of an interesting way of figuring out, okay, how do we game this? Which is not the way if you think about it, elections are all about gaming things in general, but it is kind of this different strategy that you're seeing in this primary. I'm very interested to see how it all plays out. Obviously, I'm not voting in it because I'm a Nevada resident, but because, I have been a New York resident for many years and still spend a lot of time there. It is something that is near and dear to my heart.
And I'm not voting because I am a registered, I think I've told this story on the show. I'm a registered Republican in New York because I wanted to register to vote against Donald Trump in 2016, where my vote mattered more. It's very hard to change your vote. By the way, we do have some breaking news here. This podcast is not produced in real time. One of the mayoral candidates, Brad Lander, the city comptroller, was just arrested outside of an immigration
Say
hearing.
what, Nate?
City comptroller Brad Lander, this is from AM New York, was arrested and accosted by masked federal agents at an immigration court in Lower Manhattan, is the photo caption I'm reading. There is a photo of him looking, I don't know, dramatically kind of in like I guess not quite a chokehold, or is it? But he's arrested in a somewhat violent struggle. And this is important because now Brad Lander is going to generate headlines, and now he's a focal point, right?
Yep.
I mean, now he kind of got the quasi New York Times endorsement, and like now Brad Lander's in the news, right? You're like, oh, this guy is, yeah, that's interesting. That could affect things. I don't know if it's deliberate, like.
So it was, if it's deliberate, it's incredibly smart, because you just mentioned a term that I actually think we should just talk about a little bit when it comes to ranked choice voting, which is focal points, right? When you have to rank 5 candidates, when you have all this cognitive load and it's really difficult to figure out, okay, where do I actually stand? Focal points matter, right? So it's actually incredibly important, like who can command the attention, who can be in your mind, right? We have recency effects. We have those types of biases that, like, if someone is on your mind for whatever reason and has like a slightly positive bent for, you might not even remember that it was because of this arrest. I mean, obviously now you will, because it's so close to the election, but it will make you much more likely to be like, oh, I have a good feeling about this person, I'm going to rank them. If not, even if it actually has nothing to do with the election, right? Like, if you think about it, he didn't suddenly become a better or a worse candidate just because of this one thing, but in your mind, something shifts, and all of a sudden those votes shift as well. It's a really interesting psychological phenomenon, which is why, if this was actually on purpose, it's kind of a brilliant strategy. If it wasn't on purpose, it still might actually work out very well. What's Polymarket saying, Nate?
So he's up to 2% from like 0%
hey,
before.
that's a big move in just a few minutes.
And he's already had, again, this kind of New York Times, I don't want to use it homophobic. They kind of wussied out of making an actual endorsement, right? But they kind of implicitly endorsed him. But like, if it's Machiavellian politics, then good job, Brad Lander. You just gave yourself a shot.
Yeah, you did indeed. Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff that actually ends up mattering, even though it shouldn't, because we're human, and this is the way the brain works. And when you're forced to make, well, again, you're not actually forced to make 5 choices. You can only rank one person. You can rank 2. You can put the same name for all 5 slots, which will not invalidate your ballot, but will basically just have you have one choice. It's the exact same thing.
No, and like the flip side, just name recognition is useful,
yes.
Right? Because you want to be listed somewhere, right? Like there's tons of just Zoran posters up everywhere. It's like, oh, I know who this guy is, and I like Lander or whatever, right? But like, I've heard of this guy, and I feel obligated to list 5 people, and I've heard of this guy. I'm not going to vote for somebody I didn't know, right? So like, this is interesting. Maybe I know. Yeah. I'm not quite sure if it's a 3-way race now.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, so Nate, a few weeks ago, you were at the Manifest conference, and you had some interesting takeaways about AI 2027, which we've talked about on the show before. And before we get into all of that, do you just want to let our listeners know what exactly the Manifest conference is? Because it's kind of a big deal in the AI community, right?
Absolutely. The Manifest conference is held by a prediction market called Manifold, which is a market where you trade for free. You trade for what's called mana, or kind of like credibility points, basically, but people take it very seriously. However, it's like kind of the de facto, and there are other conferences that I don't go to in the Bay Area. It's like the de facto grouping of like this overlap of prediction market nerds plus other adjacent people, rationalists, effective altruists. Some listeners will know what all these terms mean. If you read my book, there's a big detailed schema of like what these different groups are, right? Various nerds. There's like a poker tournament there that I participated in some years. It's kind of like effective altruists meet degenerate gamblers, right? It's
yes.
sponsored by...
Sorry, I'm just going to interject. It's not just effective altruists and degenerate gamblers, but I think it was last year's Manifest conference, maybe the year before, where there was a market on the chances of an orgy happening, and then the market went to 100 after the orgy happened. So it's people have fun there.
There's lots of stuff. It's a weird environment, right? You're on this actually quite pretty little campus in Berkeley called Lighthaven, right? But like everything kind of takes place inside Lighthaven, and like there's like a like a cuddle party at some point, and there's like
See, there you go. Cuddle party, listeners. Cuddle party. I have big air quotes in my hand.
There's all this discussion about like, will the world end because of AI, and is that good or bad, right? It's in other ways a pretty straight-laced cloud. My friends and I, the Substack crew and I, Substack is a sponsor, as is Polymarket, both of which I am an investor in, so I'm over-determined to be at this conference. So, we had to like sneak some wine in. We're like, you got to bring out more wine, right? People are socializing here. You got to bring out some more wine, and it's like mixed crowd. And like, yeah, it's a very interesting. It's weird kind of going from that environment to the poker world, where like, I think I kind of half sarcastically talked about it last week, but like the Bay Area feels distant to me, right? I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean like, the fact that AI is so top of mind for people, and that you have people who think that like we are on the verge of an intelligence explosion or singularity or artificial superintelligence, right? These are all like slightly different terms. But that's a commonly held belief in that community. Whereas you would venture outside of that community and people would think you were fucking crazy to think that we're going to be building Dyson spheres or whatever in a few years, right? And I feel like I'm a little bit of a hinge point between the kind of normie crowd and the AI tech rationalist crowd. Like relative to people at Manifest, I'm like, okay, I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, which is assuming that like we are on the verge of artificial superintelligence, right? We can discuss that or not, right? And I'm also like, I'm not so sure, like, what the fuck? I mean, you're transforming all of society. Shouldn't society get a say in that, even if you think it's good, right? Whereas relative to normal people, I think, okay, you're sleeping on the fact that we are maybe on the verge of profound changes, even from artificial general intelligence disruptions to how people live, how people work, certainly, how people perceive the world. And so like, I'm kind of a bridge observation there, but like, yeah, so we talked about the AI 2027 report on this podcast before when it came out, right? Which is a kind of forecast, a scenario, kind of somewhere between, they call it like a forecast or a prediction. It's like a deterministic prediction conditional on fairly fast AI development, and kind of presents one scenario where AI decides that human beings are a threat to its growth and sends out drones and kills every human sometime, I think, in the mid to late 2030s. And then one scenario where we agree to de-escalate with China and the world is profoundly transformed into an AI utopia that some people might also call a dystopia, but at least we survive as the AI's concubines or whatever we are. Exactly, right? Which apparently they think is the happy ending, right? It was interesting that like at that conference, though, I went to an update and they were kind of pushing back the timelines, right? They're like, things are a little bit slower than we thought, right? One big benchmark. So AIs that are agentic, that for example, search the web to do tasks, like that's still not implemented. I'm sure it will be at some point, but I think there's a little bit of a feeling that like we are not, I don't know. People are very reluctant to communicate these things, I think, right? I think there's a slight update toward like, maybe we're not on a trajectory towards super acceleration. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I should back up, right? Like I am skeptical of claims. So the different terms here, right? Right now we have what I would call spiky or patchy general intelligence for like desk jobs, right? Jobs that, we're not near having like an AI plumber. We do have AI automated driving, but that required, and it's pretty good in my opinion, but still only in a handful of cities, required a lot of very dedicated devotion to that particular task, right? And that's an important technology, right? But like, so first of all, we're mostly restricting this to things in the realm of symbol manipulation, computer, remote desk job type of stuff, right? And that's already kind of patchy. There are many things that AI is already much better than humans at, but like it can't really search the web. It can't really book a flight or make a restaurant reservation for you. It can't play poker, can't play chess, right? The image generation capabilities are pretty good. but shows some AI artifacts, right? But yeah, I think too, what they believe is that eventually AIs will learn to program themselves, right? And you'll have recursive improvement toward not just artificial general intelligence, but then artificial superintelligence, right? Where it's discovering things that like human beings have not discovered and become hyper persuasive. And I am skeptical of this for various reasons, right? One of which I just think it's kind of underdetermined, right? Like their arguments basically like, hey, look, so far we've been on a it's technically logarithmic, right? But as you add more compute, you have these scaling laws, quote unquote, right? Where as you have more compute, things get more intelligent, and it's been a fairly predictable trajectory so far. And so far, the progress is remarkable, right? If you had told somebody what ChatGPT or Claude or Google Gemini can do, if you told them that 10 years ago, they'd be fucking amazed that it can do many of these things quite well, and some things excellently with natural language, and they're very, very impressive, right? But kind of when it comes down to it, the argument is basically just, and I know I don't sound rigorous, but I spend a lot of time thinking about this. They're just like, well, line's going up, line will keep going up. And if line keeps going up, then that inevitably means that we pass super intelligence, right? And I don't think it's inevitable that line keeps going up, because I've seen a lot of lines that keep going up until they don't. That's one thing, right? Also because it's trained on human data. And so it seems like if it's trained on human data and has human reinforcement, very importantly, without human reinforcement, these things get pretty wacky, right? Then basically I'm very underwhelmed by the case for how quickly this will transform into the physical world and how quickly it achieves beyond human capabilities. And I feel like a heathen in the AI community to be skeptical about this. But this very long-winded anecdote, and the other reason too, I'm sorry I'm babbling on, Maria. I do that sometimes, right? I also think they're not really describing political constraints. Sam Altman wrote an essay that I'm going to probably write about at the newsletter soon, where it's well, we're going to have a singularity, meaning we have this explosion of new technology and intelligence, right? But it'll all feel pretty normal and we'll cope, right? I'm like, no, Sam. No, it's not going to fucking happen, right? We're not going to have a fucking singularity where we have as much technological progress in 3 years as we had in the entire hundreds of thousands of years of human and proto-human species, right? And we're just like, oh, yeah, shit's a little different. No one has a job anymore, right? Yeah. No, it's not going to be just a gentle singularity. That doesn't make any fucking sense. And and the reason why it's useful to go to conferences like Manifest is that you realize that people are out on a bit of an island. The Bay Area is far away from the rest of the country, right? It's a little insular. And so and that affects my views a bit because you're not, I think, sufficiently accounting for societal, political constraints, backlash, and so forth. So I had a great time at the conference, got to connect with people who have, because of course I'm with online before, they've never met in person. But yeah, that was my experience. I went on for 10 minutes there, Maria. So it's your turn to tell me what I'm full of shit about.
No, well, I'm not sure since I was obviously not at the conference, but I'm actually quite curious. So you said that the authors of the AI 2027 report were there, and that they have kind of modified their timeline a little bit. Did you get a chance to kind of get at whether their thinking has fundamentally changed as well, or whether they now just think that, okay, it might be a little bit slower, right? Because the way that they described it is that there is going to be kind of this kind of recursive learning. And then once you reach a moment where AIs can kind of learn from each other, program each other, et cetera, that is kind of the tipping point in their report, where we can then either have them be aligned with humanity existing or misaligned. And kind of the alignment problem is one of the big things that they highlighted in the report. And so I'm curious whether their thinking about that has changed as well, or whether they think, no, fundamentally, we still believe that, but the timeline has shifted.
No, so for one thing, when you're dealing with an exponential, then even small changes in the short term have a profound implications for where the exponential ends up, right? In COVID, if things are growing at 150% a week versus 75% a week, right? I guess it's a pretty big difference, but even 150 versus 120, that compounds over some number of periods.
Oh, yeah.
And that has a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, Um, I'll be honest. It's a little bit hard to know. Like, are they making a prediction that they would like bet on, or are they trying to like draw attention to what they view as a plausible scenario, right? Um, and there probably is some incentive if you're trying to draw attention to like to produce a more dramatic. I mean, it's a story. They had Scott Alexander, who is one of my favorite writers, writes
Yep.
formerly for Slate Star Codex, now at Astro Star Codex, to like just punch up the writing, and it's a beautifully written, interesting document, right? But there's a little bit of like we want to get attention. They let me have a chat with them before and gave me a preview of the report, right? And like so, like I think you can probably like discount a little bit based on the incentive to like paint a more robust picture and not just hedge a bit. And they were like kind of like casting a little shade on this other AI report called situational awareness, where it's like, yeah, they also kind of seem like, is this a forecast or recommendation? But I've just kind of gotten, I think they have to be like more, and to the credit, the AI 2027 authors are like, first of all, they're not Pollyannish about this, right? They're very worried that like this is going to like lead to like an AI apocalypse or other profoundly bad outcomes. So they can't be accused of being like having an optimism bias to their credit, right? I just think that like I am becoming increasingly unpersuaded by people thinking that we can make this leap from AGI, which I think people will have things people call artificial general, that basically you can do most desk jobs. Some people say all desk jobs, right? Let's say you can do the large majority of desk jobs as well or better than the large majority of human beings, right? I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Hedging now with saying the large majority as opposed to all, and then we're not that far from that. Well, we can debate that, right?
Yeah.
The leap to the physical world and to superintelligence, I've read all these reports. I've talked to lots of people. I just think they take that too much for granted, and I think they need to like treat it as a possibility. But like, I think it's really underdetermined as far as like a persuasive explanation of that for me. Conditional upon that, then I think these reports like underestimate like the societal piece and
Yeah.
how society resists and pushes back. I mean, like, yeah.
Well, not just resisting and pushing back. I mean, I think this kind of like almost dismissive attitude, like what you were saying with Sam Altman, like, yeah, it's going to happen and we'll cope. Like, no, this is going to cause, if it does happen, even to some extent, there's going to be massive disruption, right? And it's not going to be peaceful. People do not like their jobs being taken away. And, you know, it's interesting because we talked on the show before where there were, union workers striking at ports where some of their jobs were getting automated, and that was basically less work for them. And so technically it was actually kind of better, but practically speaking, they were like, no way, right? Like, you're taking away jobs, you're taking away hours. Like, we don't want this kind of marginal efficiency from these robotic things. We want our workers getting money. And they were effective, right? Like, they stopped working, the strikes actually worked. And that's kind of one very small piece of it, and in a place where like the disruption, it's not like they were all going to be out of jobs. It was just kind of, it was relatively small, probably didn't feel relatively small to them, but it was a relatively small piece of this larger mosaic. But if you get those kinds of protests, even with something like that, imagine the pushback that you're going to get in different areas that starts becoming.
No, we just came off a weekend in which we had mass political protests, the No Kings protest, right?
Yep.
You have a U.S. senator getting arrested, and now mayoral candidate in New York. You have, maybe most importantly of all, Israel bombing Iran because of technology, right? I don't want to take a very serious situation and make too cute an analogy, but like, here you have technology that like Iran's nuclear program that Israel feels could be threatening to its interest or to global interest, right? And they're bombing the hell out of Iran right now, right? And like, so to think that like you're going to have these profound transformations and the world kind of stands idly by, right? And the fact that people kind of in what I call the river, right, the DC types, are often clueless and dismissive about AI, that's actually a reason to think that the political reaction is not priced in, right? It's counterintuitive, but because eventually it will be. People, when their jobs, if and when their jobs are threatened, if and when it profoundly rebalances power, if and when it potentially makes the U.S. and China be huge hegemons relative to the rest of the world. It's already the two superpowers, but if now Europe and the Middle East and everyone else is behind, right? Like, what's that going to mean? And so, yeah, not wrestling. And there are two ways to read that. One way to read it is that, like, okay, that means they're not pricing in the constraints, society, the legal system, resource constraints. Right? It just kind of seems incongruous to have this world where the Middle East is at war. Who knows when China and Taiwan will go to war? Ukraine's still at war, right? Democracy, I don't want to be overly dramatic, right? But Trump presents certain threats to the U.S. Yeah, and it's like, global war. It's like, kind of, what are we... It's not going to be a smooth singularity.
No, none of this is smooth. And I think that you also cannot underestimate human survival instinct, right? And their desire not just to survive, but to they don't like having things taken away from them. And, at some point, this is, if we look at the kind of big theories, histories of the world, none of those transitions were ever smooth, right? And people do start rising up and rebelling, and we're seeing unrest all over the world. And as you say, Nate, climate change, all of these things, we are not living in a nice, peaceful, sunny moment in time where everything is just going well and people have become complacent. We were, but now I think that complacency is fading, and a lot of that angst and frustration is boiling up in different ways to the surface. So I think that this is going to be profoundly disruptive. And so we'll just see how that plays out, right? And at what point, because I think you made a good point at the beginning of our conversation about this, that San Francisco is a little bit of an island. And I'm putting San Francisco here in quotes because letting it stand in for kind of that community. And it's an echo chamber, right? Because you have these people who are all together, all in the same place, going to the same events, talking to each other, reinforcing each other's ideas. And when that happens, that's never good, right? The best things, best ideas, best businesses, best transitions happen where you have more outsiders and people who are open to kind of different views, different backgrounds, different types of people coming together. And that's not what's happening in it is a little bit of a bubble. And so I think that that's just really important to keep in mind in terms of what we're seeing now and also what we're likely to see unless something changes. Because, unless that bubble pops, their thinking will still be reinforcing each other for a while.
I think there's a disconnection there that would lead me to conclude that they have not thought about kind of the politics and society piece of this as much as you or I might, Maria. So it's frustrating because I don't know as much about AI as these people do, right? And there kind of can be an accusation, well, we spent more time thinking about this. Well, I know more about politics than any of them do, right? And so I'm trying to serve as a bridge between these two kind of communities, so to speak.
Yeah, well, let's see how it all plays out, Nate. I'm very curious, once you get once you get invited to the Manifest conference next year, what happens and how that thinking might shift. Let's definitely, I think this is a topic that we come back to often for good reason, and I think it's something that we have to keep revisiting to see what's changed or hasn't changed, and how we feel about that. On that note, let's leave the world of AI behind and enter our other bubble, Nate, of poker. And best of luck to the two of us as we hit the tables this week. Let's try to reclaim some of our poker glory.
Yeah, if there's no poker on the show next week, that means we sucked.
Yes, if we don't talk about it, you know how it's going. Good luck to the two of us, Nate. See you at the tables.
See you, Peter.